Good morning, America. I'm Charles Gibson.
I'm Diane Sawyer, and it's Tuesday, September 11th, 2001.
It is lunchtime in London, 5 a.m. in Los Angeles, and 8 a.m. here in New York, live from the CNN Financial News headquarters.
It is beautiful outside, perfect September day with lots of sunshine. Oh, would you look at Washington, huh? I'm going outside today.
Other than that, it's kind of quiet around the country. We like quiet. It's quiet. It's too quiet.
A breaking news story to tell you about. Apparently, a plane has just crashed into the World Trade Center here in New York City. It happened just a few moments ago, apparently. We have very little information available at this point in time. Obviously, horrified commuters were absolutely devastated when they heard this explosion. We talked with somebody a moment ago, another eyewitness, Elliot Walker. Elliot, can you hear me?
Yes. Hi, Katie.
Hi, Elliot. Tell me where you are and what you saw.
Well, I live in this area. I've returned to my apartment, but I was walking down the sidewalk delivering my young daughter to school, and we heard a very loud sound, the kind of sound you hear when a plane is going fast past you, followed by an enormous crash and an immediate explosion. I don't think we could feel shockwaves, but we sort of felt like we did. And we were in a position where we could see the Trade Center almost immediately between the other buildings. And an enormous fireball that must have been 300 feet across was visible immediately.
Elliot, have you, of course, because of the incident that occurred in the early 1990s, have you seen any evidence, Elliot, of people being taken out of the building? You say that emergency vehicles are there, understandably so, but of course the major concern is human loss. I mean, do you know if there were many people in the building?
Oh, another one just hit. Something else just hit. A very large plane just flew directly over my building, and there's been another collision. Can you see it? I can see it on the shot.
Oh, my.
Something else has just...
We just saw a plane circling the building.
It is in the other building.
We just saw a plane circling the building.
That's a hard.
That's flames, man.
See,
that's
really
the second
building, so...
Oh, my God.
No.
No, because the one on the
second building's on fire. That's right. The one on the right has a hole in it.
There's a hole in it. The other one's the one that exploded.
No, I think it was the
That's a reflection.
of the first building.
That's a reflection.
At least I hope it was.
I do, too.
It's a rumor. Somebody just called and said that on CNN. A second plane just crashed into...
Stop it!
A second plane.
Wait a minute.
buildings.
They are two buildings, and that is lower.
So it's a terrorist attack, isn't it?
That's what they're saying.
It's got to be.
Somebody just called.
Oh, my goodness.
Oh, no. A second plane might have crashed, and a second building is on fire.
This is as close as we can get to the base of the World Trade Center. You can see the firemen assembled here, the police officers, FBI agents, and you can see the two towers. A huge explosion now raining debris on all of us. We better get out of the way.
He's in trouble on that one, and everybody's starting to run when they see Tower 1 falling to the ground.
Quite certain he pledges the government's full support, as would be obvious, for the victims and their families, as well as a full-scale investigation to hunt down those responsible. Let's go back to Cindy Hsu in the newsroom, who's joining us now with another update. Cindy?
Wait a second. Is this a live picture? This is a live picture. We are seeing the second World Trade Center Tower number 1 has just collapsed, ladies and gentlemen. You see it live in our picture. One World Trade Center has just collapsed. That means both World Trade Center buildings have collapsed.
You're listening to Canary Cry Radio.
Incredible. Okay, I had to go find people who need help.
Can anybody hear me? I'm a civilian. I'm trapped inside of one of the fire trucks underneath the collapse that just happened. Stand by, there's people close to you. I can't breathe much longer. Please save me. I'm in a camping truck. I can barely breathe. Please save somebody.
Katie, I don't want to alarm anybody right now, but apparently it felt just a few moments ago like there was an explosion of some kind here at the Pentagon.
I want to tell you that we are getting word from New York right now that another building has collapsed. I understand that this is a 47-story building. Do we have pictures of it? I guess that's smoke now. Correct me if I'm wrong in the control room, please. But is that smoke coming from this third collapse? Okay, that is what we're understanding, which makes sense because it looks like the sun is going down, so that perhaps it wasn't as full as it might be normally around 5:30 on a Tuesday.
That information, of course, take a look at that right-hand side of the screen.
It's going down right now.
There it is.
Yep.
Went down right there.
Newly released photos of the September 11th attacks are shedding new light on one of the darkest days in U.S. history. Some say they prove that the assault on the U.S. homeland was indeed homegrown.
September of 2005, I met with one of the members of the 9/11 Commission in Philadelphia. I had a lunch with him.
Did you ask him at that lunch meeting in Philadelphia whether or not anybody on the 9/11 Commission had an agenda or was covering up for somebody or was protecting somebody?
The essence I received, and I asked that question directly about what the nature was of why they did, what was the focus of the commission. And during that conversation, this commissioner said flat out that everybody on the commission was covering for someone. Now,
let me hear that again. Everybody on the commission, you mean the commissioners themselves, was covering for someone?
That was the way I interpret that statement.
I'm getting a little tired of college professors who hate their country and who bring this hatred onto a campus full of impressionable students. Am I wrong to be offended and angry about that, sir?
Well, you are wrong, Bill, because you haven't studied the case. We've created an organization consisting of experts and scholars, pilots, aeronautical engineers, mechanical engineers, structural engineers, civil engineers, physicists. We've been examining what the government's been telling us, and frankly, Bill, it's a fantasy. None of the major claims made by the government can be sustained. We've been looking at this from every point of view. The government has a story it wants to sell us. We're not buying it.
Okay, you don't have to buy anything. You're American. You want to be a nut, you can be a nut. And you are a nut. Because in order for any conspiracy of this magnitude to take place, thousands of Americans would have to buy into it, would have to know about it, and would have to keep their mouth shut about it. That's never going to happen. You're like the guys who think that the space aliens kidnapped Elvis or something like that. That's where you are.
Here's Basil and Gonz.
Hey everybody, and welcome to Canary Cry Radio. My name's Basil.
And this is Gonz. Welcome to episode number 90.
90.
And we're talking about something we've never talked about on this show. Well, actually we have, but not.
Well, we've talked about it. We've never done a full episode about 9/11.
Yeah.
And, I guess it's kind of weird because it's kind of like, I don't know, the epitome of conspiracy theories in America for the past 15 years. But, there's just so much conjecture, so many theories, so much information out there. I don't know. We just didn't really feel compelled to do it.
Yeah. I think we actually had that conversation too at some point.
Yeah, we did.
That, it's so saturated with information that we would just be another, a voice in the wind, so to speak.
We just wouldn't be able to say anything that, what hadn't been said 1,000 times before.
Right.
But we got in contact with a lady who has a little bit different perspective. Now, when I say that, I'm not talking about she has some big brand new theory, but as you'll hear, she focused more not on, if it was a hologram hitting the tower, or if the tower was demolished, or if it was a remote control plane. Not so much that, but what exactly happened on the planes themselves and the inconsistencies there. Where did the passengers go if indeed 9/11 happened differently than the official story?
Right. And I'm pretty convinced that it did happen differently. And I think our guest brings to light pretty strong evidence that something is amiss. And, you be the judge. You don't believe us, don't believe her, but be good brains.
It's very interesting. And she does a good job of kind of throwing out her sources so you can go take a look at them.
Right.
Most of which are available to normal human beings. Okay, so that's that. There you go. Get ready. Hold on to your butts.
Well, before we get in, though.
Okay.
I'm sure everybody is wondering, where you were, what you were doing, that whole thing. I mean, that's the only unique perspective that we can provide about 9/11.
I had an interesting morning that morning. I was in bed on September 10th. No, on September 10th, the night before, I was in bed and I could not fall asleep. I was just super restless. I kind of had I don't know, I just had this intense anxiety for some reason. And I went into my parents' room and I told my mom.
Wait, hold on. How old were you?
2001.
Well, let's give an average. Yeah,
I was not in high school yet.
Okay.
Yeah. So, I was a young boy, and I go into my mom's room, and I really didn't know how to explain it. I just told her, I just had a really bad feeling. I was really scared. She's like, okay, well, you don't have to go to school tomorrow. So I woke up the next day, stoked that I didn't have to go to school. This was the best get out of school excuse ever. And then, I get up and I go over and I could hear the TV on in my parents' room, and I just kind of go in there and they're watching it on the TV there, and I just kind of sit in bed with me and my parents and watch the news all day long. So it was a really interesting experience.
Yeah.
And I got out of school, so that was cool.
Well, yeah, that's interesting. My experience was totally different. I was a little bit older than you. You were what? Infringing in the teenage years or something, right? Right about that time?
I can't remember exactly, but I was...
Do some math. I think math can help you in the situation.
It's not worth it. I was just I was in middle school.
Okay. Well, I was, where was I? I was actually, it was in between, it was the end of my senior year of high school. I was going into college. So that day I was supposed to get up and go turn in some paperwork at the UC California local place where I was going to college.
Going to college. College boy.
Yeah. And so I woke up, and in those days, I was a very heavy audiophile. I still am, but I was more intense at the time. I mean, I did things that my wife would never let me do now, which is basically I had stereo speakers on every pillar of my bed post type thing.
Oh,
so I was one of those guys. So I had two over my, one on each side of my head, and then two from my feet, on the bottom. And I would go to sleep listening to the radio, and I would wake up obviously to the radio. So I get up, I'm kind of drowsy or whatever, and I hear Howard Stern, and he's going off about something, and I'm like, "Whoa, this sounds way more serious than
his normal material.
Your normal nonsense that I wake up to."
This was your pre-Jesus days.
This is definitely my pre-Jesus days. Speakers on my bedpost, Howard Stern. Yeah. Let's just say definitely pre-Jesus days. And so I get up and I go downstairs, and my mother's cooking breakfast or something, and we're watching the TV. And the whole time I'm thinking, this is like a movie. Like this doesn't feel real. Like what is going on? Yeah. And the strangest thing though was I mean, obviously this was like a huge event. Obviously everyone's talking about it. But when I went, I got in my car, I drove down to the university to turn in my stuff, and just business as usual. Yeah, like business as usual. Stuff's normal. I went to the university. Everything's kind of normal.
It just hadn't really like sunk in yet or something that what was going on.
Either that, or I think most people, if they weren't in some sort of institutional situation, either in school, because I think most people that were in classrooms and stuff, that's all they did. They watched the news all day. But these were people that were working at, admin desks and stuff like that. I mean, maybe they were listening to it on the radio, but they still had to do their jobs,
Right.
So, I mean, it was just a typical normal thing. I, went and turned in my stuff and came back home, and I was glued to the TV, but I think I literally was getting ready to move out and go to college. So I was more concerned about like, I got to pack and, do that kind of thing. It was literally a week or so before I left. So I mean, no compelling sleepless night, prophetic, thing like you, Basil, but,
right.
But waking up to Howard Stern is definitely,
that is a totally different experience than I had.
But what's interesting from my perspective is that I think because I studied sociology in college, and I had a one professor who was a Vietnam War veteran.
Yeah.
And he was very passionate about just conspiracies. Like he was all about it. He would just,
as Vietnam vets should be.
Yeah. And we would just watch films of just stuff. And I mean, and that was the class where I first thought, and he talked about 9/11 a lot in that class. And it was weird because getting into college, it was kind of like, yeah, that happened, but yes, it's patriotic, this and that, but I'm going into college. I am not concerned about the world right now. I'm more concerned about my world,
Right.
So that was weird. And then, just slowly over the years, obviously seeing the different movies and stuff that talks about it, but it wasn't really, I don't think it was until I think 2007 where I really started like thinking like, and it was all those movies that were coming out too, Loose Change, and even Zeitgeist kind of touched on it, even though, parts of it were not so cool or whatever. But what was frustrating to me was just everyone around me saying like, oh, it's, believing the official story. Like why can't you believe that it was just, these terrorists? And,
it was crazy too, how Fahrenheit 9/11 came out.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it was like a huge national theatrical release.
Yeah. 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 I remember that.
I don't even remember exactly when that movie came out. It must have been a year or two afterwards.
Yeah.
But I mean, even that, like, you don't get that kind of stuff anymore.
Yeah.
Something happens, you don't get a huge theatrical release with a giant distribution deal.
Right.
All about, uncovering the conspiracy. Now, obviously, Michael Moore, there's some questionable things about that movie and him in general, but I mean, what the heck, man? That was crazy.
Yeah. And I really think, and this is something that I've thought about. I don't know how I could probably explore it more, but I guess the Luciferian, whoever you want to call it, who's behind it, they must have known that there is going to be this truth movement. You know what I mean? Like they had to have known that there's going to be sort of opposing group to rise and, question everything and that sort of thing.
I think I question that because it was really the first thing on this scale that had been done in the information age.
Right.
You know what I mean? Leaders for centuries and centuries and forever have been pulling this kind of stuff. I mean, Hitler bombed his own building and this, anyways, can't think of any other examples, but it happens.
There's a lot of conspiracies. Yeah.
Yeah. And, but I think this was really the first big scale, false flag operation in the information age. And, maybe they had no way of anticipating the amount of information that would be available to just an average person.
That's true. Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like that, we're in a whole new part of human history where everybody's really, really empowered to be able to find the truth. And, that it's taken 15 years here, but I mean, it's actually, I talk to more people, even outside of the fringe thing, who know in their heart, they may not even know all the details, but they've heard enough here and there that, the majority of people that I come in contact with are at least suspicious of 9/11.
Right. Yeah. Well, that's true. That's kind of how I was since the moment it happened,
Right.
So I think that's true for a lot of people, but I think maybe you're right. Maybe they didn't anticipate the flood of truther movements. But in light of that, I'm sure they have tried to infiltrate that as well and try to create sort of a controlled opposition. I mean, Alex Jones is the classic accused of that. He's being paid off by the Jesuits or the Luciferians or whatever,
right,
to perpetuate the opposite view or whatever.
Yeah, totally. All right, so let's just get right into it. That's enough talk for us. Let's get into it.
On September 11th, 1991, during the State of the Union address, George H.W. Bush called for a new world order. Some 9 years later, in September of 2000, a report was published entitled Rebuilding America's Defenses, Strategy, Forces, and Resources for a New Century. In the document, put together by 28 of the most qualified minds in military and tech operations, it stated, quote, "The process of transformation, even if it brings revolutionary change, is likely to be a long one, absent some catastrophic and catalyzing event like a new Pearl Harbor," end quote. 1 year later, they got their wish. The event traumatized and burned into the collective mind of society, engraved by the numbers 9/11. The following years were swamped with the motto 9/11 was an inside job, along with the fury of conspiracy theories from controlled demolitions to the directed energy weapons thesis presented by Dr. Judy Wood to shape-shifting fallen angel aliens crashing into the towers as presented by super intense YouTube guy. But our guest today has a unique perspective on 9/11, given her 30-year experience as a flight attendant and proprietary knowledge of airplanes, universal FAA protocols, standardized flight crew procedures, and all hijacking policies. She's the author of the best-selling book, Methodical Illusion, where she outlines her investigation into 9/11 in a novel format. It is our honor to welcome Rebekah Roth to Canary Cry Radio. Rebekah, how are you doing this morning?
I'm doing great. Thanks, Gons.
Woo! So, Rebekah Roth. So, first of all, thanks for coming on the show. Appreciate it. Second of all, flight attendant to novelist. Tell me a little bit about your background.
Well, as you said in the introduction, I flew for about 30 years at the time of 9/11, and I had a very exciting 30-year career. I was an international purser, and I flew mostly international, but I got quite a bit of domestic flying in. So I've seen most of the United States. There's a couple little holes here and there, nooks and crannies I haven't quite made it to yet, but I'm going to drive to those. Mm-hmm. And I was that person on the crew that always ended up hooking up with the celebrities or the sports figures that always had that uber exciting life. My layover, maybe I'd be going out to dinner with some, big NBA stars or movie stars or singers or bands or whatever. And so everyone I flew with would say, "Oh, you ought to write a book." Well, I retired from flying in 2004. And let me just touch on this for a second. At the time of 9/11, luckily I was home. I'd just gotten home, and I missed being on one of those planes by maybe about 10 hours or so. So the whole event, it was it could have been me on board. It was just so touching to me, personal, that I couldn't look at it deeply, although that watching the whole thing unfold, and I was home for 10 days afterwards because my international schedule sort of allowed me to have time off, and then it fell apart. So when I started back to flying, our airplanes were scattered all over the world. So I ended up actually flying a different route than I normally would have. And
this is after 9/11.
Yeah, after 9/11, because the planes were grounded, you'll remember. Well, in the United States, the planes were grounded for 3 or 4 days, and the international people were stuck even longer. And then what happens, we had airplanes that were sitting on the ground in places like Greenland that everybody just had to land. Once the ground stop happened, people just had to land at their nearest airport. So there's some really wild stories about where people got stuck, because wherever you could land a plane, you were going to get stuck there. And so anyway, after I saw, what had happened, I thought, well, this is really odd. I watched the whole thing unfold from the moment that second plane hit the South Tower on television. Someone called me, turn on your TV. I turned it on just in time to see that. And I thought, well, this is some kind of trick photography. There's no way an airplane can fly into a building and disappear like I just saw. And they kept playing it, luckily, over and over and over, brainwashing me. And I every time I looked at it, I thought, how did they make that happen? Because I'd studied crashes for 30 years as part of our yearly training. So I know what happens when airplanes hit anything, even a bird or a fence. You saw what happened just in LaGuardia with that Delta crash just a month ago or so. I mean, just hitting a fence, it just sheared off one wing, broke the other wing in half, and it just ripped the whole fuselage, and the nose cone was missing. And they were going about 50 miles an hour, maybe, not very fast.
Wow.
So I watched the whole thing, kept thinking, well, that's weird. How can that happen? And then as it continued to unfold, and as those next 3 years came and went, in our yearly training, if you were to ask about the events of 9/11, the training instructors just looked at you like they could kill you for asking. That's an out of bounds question type of thing, Wow. And we studied this kind of hijackings every year. We had strict protocols. Well, so around 2008 or 9, I'm retired now, so I don't keep track so much on the calendar. And, somewhere in there, I thought, well, I'm going to write a book about this mysterious lifestyle of being a flight attendant and how much fun I had. And I really did meet a lot of interesting people around the world. And so not really giving 9/11 much of a thought after I quit. Now I can look back now and tell you, since I do a wake-up process in the book. The main character, the protagonist, Vera Hansen, is where I was, basically. And that was where I knew there was something wrong with the story. It didn't jive, but I couldn't look at it, especially when I was flying. When you're flying, you're a professional flight attendant, you know that NORAD and our fighter jets are scrambled within 6 minutes of something going wrong. Whether you lose contact or the radios break down or, there's a hijacking or whatever, 6 minutes. And after 9/11, when we all knew that it took over an hour and a half to have that happen, it's not so easy to walk down the aisles looking at people smiling and thinking securely, hey, if anything happens on board, they're going to scramble jets and we'll have them at our wingtips in 6 minutes. Everything's cool. We'll take care of all that because we've all been trained to do that.
Right.
And walking down the aisle after 9/11, looking at people, I'm just thinking, I don't know. You guys have no safety net, neither do I. And it's a really uncomfortable feeling, after 30 years or almost of feeling that comfort and knowing that this is what happens. I mean, we saw it happen with that golfer who passed out when he was flying this little jet. And it's just changed everything. And security, oh my goodness, went really crazy. Afterwards, they formed the TSA, and the TSA quickly hired people that probably are working, I hate to say this, at Walmart, maybe now. Okay, you got the caliber of people. They were just hired people right off the street, not professional security type people or anything.
Right.
And what they did was they targeted the crew members initially. And they liked to do it right there at the gate area in front of everyone. So they wanted to give the passenger kind of a false sense of security. And so, we would try to we're going to work. We're not going on vacation. We're bringing our suitcase because we don't shuck our bags.
Right.
So they had a long table set up right there at the jetway as we're trying to get in to go to work and get the plane ready for the passengers, and rifling through our stuff, squeezing out our toothpaste, our suntan lotion, whatever we had. I mean, it was just insane. And so that got to be really problematic, as that last 3 years of my career just horrible because we were treated like terrorists, and so were the pilots. So these are all the things that I worked into the beginning part and the character development, the first, almost the first half of the book. I want people to understand, how 9/11 affected us as crew members. I mean, they would practically strip search pilots if their belt buckle was set off the security. I mean, I in uniform trying to get to work. Can you imagine somebody trying to, take your belt off, now take your shoes off, now take your shirt, take your wings off. I mean, it was just really nuts. I mean, we all went through it. And then here's another thing, and I did work this right into chapter 3. By the way, on my website, methodicalillusion.com, you can actually find the first 3 chapters of the book. And now I'm going to let you on the inside. A lot of that stuff is written, and it's very much 9/11, but veiled in the novel part, in the character development. There's an airplane crash, for instance, in a completely fictitious casino in Las Vegas. And when the flight attendants are hearing of this crash, they see that the building had been turned to dust, much like the towers were. Mm-hmm. And that in fact that there were no video or photographs coming into the television and the media for over a day. And yet, just like in the Pentagon, where they captured 85 closed-circuit televisions from security around the Pentagon and around the businesses around the Pentagon within 30 minutes. Just like those photographs are never going to be seen by us, so what hit the Pentagon? Same type of thing. So you see there's a lot of subliminal information in those first 150 pages or so.
Sure.
To help you kind of subliminally connect 9/11 and the Pentagon and different things. And so you understand how flight attendants are trained and what we study. And because of that, you will also know this because I'm going to tell you right now. So keep in mind, when you hear the story of Flight 93, Let's Roll, Todd Beamer, etc., those lovely heroes that they created, that flight attendants are totally in control. And if you don't think so, just try to get up and take control on the next airplane you're on. So we train for medical emergencies, evacuations, like we saw when the U.S. Airways went into the Hudson River ditching. Right. And we're trained for hijacking procedures to the point where we have code words to use to let people on the ground know what's going on, let the pilots know what's going on, and specific step-by-step protocol that had been in place since the early 70s, had not changed on 9/11 at all for that many years. So every flight attendant that goes through their yearly training, their initial training, is taught the same step-by-step procedures, none of which were followed on 9/11.
Now, what are some of those procedures that, I mean, if 9/11, was a legit hijacking, how would that have stopped it or affected the outcome? Well,
maybe not so much that I can answer that way, but the fact that those procedures were not followed, here's what happened. I'm starting to write this book, and I want to grab a Middle Eastern gentleman for a character to bring into my novel. It's fictitious. I thought to myself, okay, I'll grab a first name from one of those 9/11 hijackers and a last name from another one. So I Google search 9/11 Arab hijackers. And up in front of me comes a BBC article that tells me at least 6 of them are alive, that the Saudi government is suing the FBI and the United States government for stealing the identity and claiming these guys are dead, and they're very much alive. And 2 or 3 of them were airline pilots, still professionally, and by the way, they're still working. And I was like, what? And this was dated September 23rd, 2001. I thought, well, okay, I was really locked in on this whole thing. For 10 days straight after 9/11, I was glued to my television. Here's why. Every year we're told in our training who the suspected hijackers, troublemakers might be around. This is worldwide because we travel around the world. And never once was Osama bin Laden ever mentioned, and nor was a group called Al-Qaeda ever. So when 9/11 happened, I'm like, who are these guys? I had just been through training 2 months before. Mm-hmm. I was like, wait a minute. Why didn't they tell us this? How did they do this? How did they get control of NORAD? How did they unscramble our jets that automatically scramble in 6 minutes? These are the questions that were just ripping through me that morning watching it on television. And so looking back, when I found out that those guys were alive, it was my, I said, people, it was my wake up call. Hello. And I was like, how did that happen? I mean, I saw what everyone saw on television. So that was my 9/11 information. I had never really dove into research. At that point, I put my book aside and I dove into this. I say I'm very much like that guy in Close Encounters. I didn't build the Devil's Triangle, but I had charts and graphs around my desk. You can't imagine. I was in this thing for 20 hours a day. I slept with my laptop reading until I fell asleep every night. I'm watching videos and dissecting through crazy theories that non-airline people created, that they don't understand how we check in. They don't understand how the whole inner workings of the airline works. They have no idea what our training is. And they created things like voice morphing, and the crew members were a part of this. They didn't exist. The flights didn't operate. I read through every nonsensical theory that you can imagine, just, trying to see what was there. And so what I did was I got a hold of government documents. Like a lot of what I did was find an FBI document. It's a 110-page document. Almost everything that's in the book about 9/11 is from that. So I didn't use goofy theories of people that don't know how. I mean, I look at that stuff and I was like, that's crazy.
Yeah.
I mean, because I know how we check in. I know how, when it happens, I know how many people we talk to, because we're not passengers. It's our job and our paycheck depends on it. And so, we take it seriously, and the airlines all have a procedure set up where and including in the book, you're going to see this, and it's right in those it's in the first chapter, actually. We go into our office and we check in, and we get FAA bulletins, company bulletins. We meet our crew because it changes every time we go to work, and it's a different size depending upon what aircraft you're working. And then as a group, we walk to the airplane together. And so we can't be kidnapped. I actually read a theory that the flight attendants were replaced and kidnapped with some people that really did it. Right. It's so crazy. So that's what I did. I dissected this by knowing that, one, cell phone calls do not work at altitude. And that was one thing that was my first red flag that day. But I chose.
Oh, you mean it in reference to people making phone calls to their loved ones?
Yeah,
okay.
Like the flight attendants. And so what I did was I deconstructed this using my knowledge, my experience of, cell phones, 1, don't work. 2, airphones were horrible quality. 3, just so you know that American Airlines Flight 77, Barbara Olson, whose husband said she called collect from her cell, and then he said she called from an airphone. Well, as of January 31st, 2001, American Airlines didn't have an airphone that worked on any of their 757s. So, I mean, it's just using that kind of information and knowing that you couldn't use more than 2, well, sometimes even more than 1, but usually a person could use an airphone in first class, and maybe one could use one successfully in coach. But you couldn't have 5 people. And Flight 93, we had all of the heroes that decided that they'd take over the flight attendant's job and just take over the cockpit.
Right,
and it's really crazy, because when I read that as a flight attendant, when we bring a cup of coffee to the captain, he sits on the left-hand side of the airplane, and we walk in behind him. We have to hand his beverages over his left shoulder, because in between the co-pilot and the captain is a box that's called the onboard flight computer. And if you drop water in there, you have a China syndrome on board. It's not a pretty picture. And so everyone's trained not to pass liquids over that. So the last thing we would do is, 1, let passengers take over in a hijacking. That's just nonsense, totally. And 2, bring pots of hot water to the cockpit, because if you weren't going down, you would be going down. As I charted this information and the phone calls and the details that were supposedly being said on each and every flight, on that particular flight, you have a very, very narrow aisle. It's 24, 26 inches wide. For a man to go down the narrow aisle of a 757, anybody that's not used to walking down an aisle, a narrow aisle with a coffee pot in your hands when the airplane is coming out of the sky 6 to 10,000 feet a minute and at a 40-degree plus angle and then upside down. Even I couldn't have done that.
Right.
And so when I built those charts and I saw that, oh, this is a make-believe story. And that's actually what I did. I took the details one by one of what the flight attendants said on Flight 11. Now, another thing that I noticed, you guys, is that each of the 4 planes that came that were done, 1, 2, 3, 4, I dissected them this way. Flight 11, 2 people called out. Flight 175 both from Boston, 2 people called out. They also called out at the same minute. And then Flight 77, 2 people called out again. Only on Flight 93 did things change, and about 11 people called. Many of them called more than one call. Tom Burnett called his wife 4 or 5 times. There's some controversy. She says one number, the FBI says another. But there's controversy also because she was a retired flight attendant. And when she looked at her caller ID and it said Tom's cell, guess what she thought? Uh-oh, he didn't get on his flight. And so she picked up the phone and said, Tom, are you okay? What's up? She knew he wasn't at altitude because she's a flight attendant. She knows the cell phones don't work up there.
Right.
And he says, no, I'm in the air. I'm on the plane. We've been hijacked. And she's like, her mind is saying, what's really going on? and so, she's just trying to dissect all this because as a flight attendant, if you got a phone call from your spouse that said you were on your cell, you would know you were on the ground.
Now, in your charts, have you worked through when those cell phone calls may have been made? Because obviously the planes have to come down lower in altitude in order to run into buildings. I mean, is there a possibility that those phone calls were made during a lower altitude time, closer to the phone?
Well, let me tell you what happened. I guess it's kind of hard to dissect this, but let me just use the flight attendants on Flight 11, and then I'll tell you how it was done. The flight attendant, this is kind of how I dissected this. The flight attendants, 2 of them, called in about 20 minutes, give or take. And again, the official times vary. So when I say about, I've read at 19, 20, 21, or 22 minutes after departure from Boston. That's the official story. So that's all I can go on. I mean, it's like there's multiple crash times for Flight 93, and it's a 7-minute variance. So we have 2 flight attendants. They both call into company phone numbers. Betty Ong calls reservations, and Amy Sweeney calls, and they call at the same time. She calls to her supervisor, who she'd known for years and was personal friends with. He says she called from her cell phone. He should know. They're personal friends. And Betty Ong calls first, and the stuff that she said, you guys, and this is right out of an FBI transcript. She first says this. He, as in one hijacker, this is a little different story than what we were told. He has sprayed pepper spray or mace in business class, and we can't breathe in business class. She's calling from her jump seat at 3R, which is about 150 feet away from business class. It's in the very tail section of the airplane. And I thought to myself, well, that's interesting, because I remember immediately leaving Hawaii, some cheap perfume being sprayed in one section, the whole airplane's choking on it, right? And complaining about it.
Right.
And I thought, well, pepper spray or mace, if you spray that in a pressurized cabin, everyone's going to be suffering from the effects of it.
Right.
And yet she was on the phone for 27 minutes, never once complained, never once coughed or had complained that her eyes were watering or she couldn't breathe. And I dawned on me right then and there that the other flight attendant didn't have a problem either, breathing. And if you were pressurized, you would have the effects of that. I don't care where you sat. You could have been hiding in a bathroom. You're going to breathe in that air. It's all recirculated. And pepper spray and mace, if you've ever been a part of a Occupy crowd or something where the police now in the last couple of years have gotten a little bit out of control and like to spray stuff like that, you're going to remember what it's like. And I actually got caught once with in Korea in a riot. So I've had some experience with that myself. And I thought, well, no, that's not right. That tells me the plane wasn't pressurized. And then Betty Ong says, again, he stood upstairs. And there are no stairs on the 767. There's only a 747 that has stairs. And so I thought, well, okay, well, that sounds like they're in a hangar and they're no longer pressurized. And then she said, we're the first. And I thought, wow, somebody told her the scenario, because this was the first plane. Remember, Flight 11 supposedly went into the North Tower. That's the first plane. And someone had to have told her that, because there's no way she would know what was coming in the future. We're the first? And then she said, we're in the air. We're up in the air. We're up in the air. We just left Boston. We're up in the air. I think, but I don't know, we might be being hijacked. And let me tell you this, if you've been hijacked, of course, you're in the air. It's like if you've been carjacked, you're in your car. You're not on your bike, you know? Right. You don't have to say you're in there, because if you were on the ground, you'd open the door and get the passengers out. And I thought, well, that in the air comment is very odd for her to say, because it's unnecessary. And she also didn't ever follow any protocol. She was talking to people in the company, both of these girls, and they never really gave the correct. They never followed protocol. Let me just say that. They didn't give the right information out. And she was confused. And you will not be confused as a flight attendant that's highly trained. Hijackers on board, you know it. It's not, I don't know, we might be. She knew something was going on, but she didn't know what. So that told me that it wasn't a typical hijacking with a hijacker in the aisle. Obviously, he stood upstairs, so he was in some sort of hangar. And so if you've never been in a big airplane hangar, like 747 hangar, and there's stairs in every corner pretty much. And up above, there's a mezzanine level where there's office spaces. And then I was dissecting the next flight attendant, the same flight that called in. She called her supervisor, whom she had just stood in front of when she checked out that morning from leaving Boston, because that's what you do. You check in and you sign out. And so I'm on Flight 11 today, or it's like you sign your pay sheet, right?
Right.
And, like I said, he was personal friends with her. He knew her probably from training for 10, 15 years, somewhere in there. And when she calls several times, but she initially made a mistake a flight attendant would never make. And she said, the hijacker, again, one single person, he was seated at 9B. And you would never do that. Because if I said, yeah, that guy in 6B is the hijacker, or 9B is the hijacker, here's what we would do. In a hijacking, our protocol is to get that airplane on the ground to liberate you passengers and get the airplane free from that person. And then sometimes that includes being rushed by some sort of SWAT team or special ops group. You know, maybe it's Army Rangers or Navy SEALs or people that are actually trained to do this. Right. Depending upon where you land, what you're going to get, right? Maybe it's FBI people. But what if you told them that the hijacker was in 9B and they come on the plane to liberate it, there's a big chance an innocent person would be killed if you labeled that person as the hijacker. Right. So it's not something we would do. We're much more careful than that. And that was another thing I thought, well, that's weird. And they're both saying it's just one he. As instead of the official story, there were 4 or 5 guys on each plane.
Right.
And then I got to looking at 9B, and lo and behold, if he isn't a highly trained assassin from a foreign intelligence agency, can you believe that? And not only that, I mean, I was just blown away when I got into this. I was like, what?
Wait, the actual guy sitting on
9B, the one they said was the hijacker.
On the manifest.
Yeah, 9B. And so Amy Sweeney calls in. She says, he's the hijacker, 9B. I look him up. There's lots on information. If you just Google search passenger 9B on Flight 11 on 9/11, there's millions of pages. He's actually a hero in his country. We are to believe that he was killed by a plastic box cutter, yet he was a highly trained assassin, and his friends said that he could kill any human being with a pen and a credit card. He was traveling on business, and I'm sure he had a pen and a credit card. Well, even more interesting about this character, he was fluent in English. He grew up in Denver, Colorado. He was fluent in Hebrew because he moved to Israel when he was 14. He was fluent in Arabic, which is the language of the hijackers, supposedly. So here, as the story goes, he was also not just a highly trained assassin for a special ops unit of the Israeli Defense Forces, Mossad, whatever it is, called the Sayeret Matkal. They're highly trained assassins. Mm-hmm. They're trained in hijack procedures, anti-hijack specialists, and they're also trained in hostage rescue. Now, hostage rescue forces are who would liberate our airplane. That's the same kind of people that if we landed in Cleveland and we had a hijacking on board, the SWAT team would come on. That's what they're trained to do, hostage rescue. Because at that point, you're considered a hostage if you're a passenger. And I thought, well, what are the chances that this guy... And so the story goes, she calls back to her supervisor and says, oh, no, I made a mistake. The hijacker's in 10B. And so we're expected to believe now that a guy who's fluent in Arabic is listening to the two guys behind him that are the two supposed Arab hijackers, speaking in Arabic, planning the new Pearl Harbor. The first hijacking of 9/11 in Arabic, and he hears it, he does nothing, and they are managed to kill the guy who could kill any human being with a pen and a credit card with a plastic box cutter and a 1/4-inch blade. Hello, are you stretching your mind to that reality? That's the official story. And when I read that, I thought, wow, I missed all that. I didn't know.
So that's the official story as written down in the FBI files.
That's the official story. He was the first casualty of 9/11. Yeah.
So that's it. Either this crazy Israeli Defense Force assassin somehow is defeated and 9/11 happens how we're told, or something else happened.
Yeah, well, that's exactly what hit me like a ton of bricks, because putting together the fact that the plane could not have been pressurized with pepper spray or mace in the cabin.
Right.
2, that there were stairs mentioned. There was a possible confusing type of hijacking situation, but she wasn't sure what was going on. And then she said another thing that triggered the rest of this. Really, for me, it was like a collapse of my reality. And what she said was, we can't communicate with the pilots. They aren't answering their phone. Well, first off, early on in a flight like that, within the first 18 to 20 minutes, there isn't a flight attendant in the back cabin that would call the pilots for any reason unless there was an emergency on board or they had started a descent. Because she would be busy doing her breakfast service, and she was probably the back galley position. So she'd be loading meal carts, making coffee, juice, and that's one of the things that would be going on. We can't call the cockpit unless there's an emergency until the aircraft reaches 10,000 feet. And so that first, 5 to 8 minutes or so, and then we don't get out of our jump seats until the aircraft levels off at cruise altitude, pretty much, almost. So for the first 15 minutes.
The story continues to not line up.
Yeah, it continues to kind of fall apart. As a flight attendant, I'm like, why would that be? Well, here's what triggered this. In the 90s, there was a company called SPC Corporation that sold a flight termination system. This is the same system we use now to operate our drones around the world. Mm-hmm. And SPC Corporation had an interesting CEO. I didn't know any of this until I really got into this research.
Right.
The CEO was a guy named Rabbi Dov Zakheim. He was also the comptroller of the United States Pentagon. He was under investigation for misplacing $2.3 trillion.
Right.
And Donald Rumsfeld announced that on September 10th, 2001, that this money had been misplaced, and they were in a serious investigation. And that was also taking place in the Pentagon. Coincidentally, right near, let me just say this. The main offices that were doing the investigation were not next to each other, but they were both completely wiped out. I believe one unit lost about 80 or 84 investigators that were hot on the trail of that money. Mm-hmm.
Wow.
And I'm not sure how the hijackers knew that they should target that particular office, but somehow they thought that would help them in their cause, I guess. Okay, we're starting to put it together now. So here's this thing. It's called, some airlines called it, I believe American called it, the flight interruption system. But the flight termination system was a kind of an easy, simple plug-in device to that onboard computer that sits between the pilots. And so what that was a remote control device. And since the 70s, they've had these devices where they've actually flown an airplane from California to Australia remotely.
Wow.
A 737. So this is not anything new, but this is how it was sold to some of the commercial carriers in the United States. Not all of them bought it, but it was sold, listen carefully to these words, in the event of a hijacking, and a hijacker were to take over the cockpit. I'm not sure who that is, but I think I have a pretty good idea now. I always wondered, who's we? We could take over remotely and land the aircraft where it would be liberated by, some Delta Force or something.
Wow.
Now, on 9/11, we had 4 aircraft that we were led to believe were taken over by hijackers inside the cockpit. Well, you're going to ask yourself right now, I know, slapping yourself saying, why didn't we use that flight termination system that day?
Mm-hmm.
Because it was already in use. And what happens when the flight termination system takes over an aircraft? They lose all communication. Let me repeat that. When the flight termination system takes over a commercial airplane, they lose all communication, including with the flight attendants in the cabin. And what did Betty Ong say? The pilots are not picking up their phone. We can't get into the cockpit. We can't talk to the pilots. They're not answering their phone. Bingo. And I'm telling you guys, when that hit me, and I started doing this research I read tons and tons, thousands of hours of stuff. And then I said, you know what? Those flight attendants were calling me. I'm going to start right there with those 2 girls. And I started there on Flight 11 with those 2 flight attendants because that's who I knew. That was my job. I put my flight attendant shoes on. I walked that aisle and I thought, now if I were Betty Ong, what would I be doing that first 18 minutes? Well, I'd be in my jump seat for quite a while. And why would I call the pilots? I wouldn't, because I'd be making juice and coffee and cooking the eggs. Somebody's got to do those green eggs and spam for you. That's right. Position, probably. I'm thinking, okay.
Well, there's an interesting little side piece too that you mentioned, Rabbi Zakheim, the CEO of SPC International. I think it was between 1987 and 2001, and I believe there's a subsidiary, right, of SPC, Tridata Corporation, that was part of the investigation of the World Trade Center attacks in '93. Which gave him all the blueprints of the 2 towers. Yeah.
That's true. They actually had some of the reconstruction. So they're the only company that had blueprints. And since my books come out, I've become friends with a lot of interesting people like Richard Gage from Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth, and even they can't get a hold of the blueprints. And those buildings have been gone for over a decade. They can't get a copy of them. But Dov Zakheim's Tridata subsidiary company did. He also is connected in another interesting way to 9/11 as well. Here we had a dual citizen with a foreign country as the comptroller of the Pentagon. The comptroller is the main banker of the Pentagon. He was also associated with a consortium or a group that did something else. They refurbished commercial 767s and turned them into military tankers and sold them to militaries around the world. They took commercial 767s to an Air Force base there's sort of a place in Florida. I believe it was Eglin Air Force Base that they're kind of connected to. And they refurbished that commercial 767 and turned it into a refueling tanker. Now, how connected to that is 9/11? We got a guy whose subsidiary company has the blueprints to the towers.
Mm-hmm.
He has access to military tankers that are 767s. And if you look a little bit deep into this, you'll see that airline pilots claim that airplane that we think is Flight 175 has some sort of additional thing on the bottom, possibly the remote control device. So it's often referred to as a pod. It's not normal. And that the distance between the nose and the leading edge of the wing is longer than a 200 series extended range 767. So it's more like the plane they use for the refueling tankers. Mm. And that's the stuff I've read some pilots that are they're into planes. I'm not into planes, but that they are. So I'm okay. Well, that's kind of coincidental that we've got this guy. Well, he's not the only dual citizen I found. We got 9B, who's also a dual citizen, U.S. Israel, who's a highly trained assassin on our first aircraft. Now, what are the chances, right? Well, it gets deeper than that. The guys who ran security at the towers, it just goes on and on and on. And so when people ask me, what about these redacted 28 pages that are pointing to Saudi Arabia? And people want them brought out. And that is a complete distraction. I found no Arab Saudi Arabians connected to down any rabbit hole I went down. I did exactly find a Middle Eastern country connected, but they're not a Muslim country. Much like the country that Dov Zakheim has his other citizenship with.
Right.
So, okay. You mentioned before that the transcripts, the manuscripts from the FBI pointed to an airplane that was unpressurized and possibly in a hangar, right?
That's right.
Okay. And now we have remote control devices being used on the same planes which could have been adapted for military use or military refueling. Can you put all these pieces together for us? What exactly do you think happened?
I did, and that's kind of what I wanted to do with my main character. My target audience were people. I didn't know at the time that I wrote this that there are millions of people out there that looked at what I saw on TV and thought the same thing. That's not right. And for this whole 14 years, they've thought something's not right here. Because I've sold thousands of books now, and the book went up overall on Amazon to like number 9 for a while. Right out of 8 million books, it just kicked off after a certain radio show that I did. And I'm inundated with emails of people saying, yeah, I've always thought that was odd at Shanksville. There was no plane crash there and stuff like that. So, what I did was I took my main character and I gave her piece by piece, a little bits at a time. As she wakes up, the reader wakes up. And it's been very, very effective to lay this out. So very methodically, my character goes through these protocols not being followed, the flight termination system taking over the planes remotely, how they lost all communication, the companies that were involved in the cover-up. Now, this is another interesting factor. There were 2 companies that were sitting in the FAA headquarters for 2 years prior to 9/11. One was called PTEC, the other called MITRE, M-I-T-R-E. MITRE is really a radar specialist, and PTEC was again a foreign-owned startup software company. Foreign-owned. They were basically 3 years old when they got into, at the time of 9/11, they were on board 22 U.S. government computer systems. Now, that's an interesting history with PTEC. They come from an Israeli company, kind of a spin-off from a couple communications companies. And by the way, 9B, he was a communications company specialist. His company was called, I forget, it's kind of a Hawaiian name, like, I want to say Akamai. I forgot what Akamai, I think was his company's name. It was a internet and communication company. Security, internet security, and that sort of thing. It's very interesting, the people that are connected to this. But in the mid-'80s, there was some software called Promise Software, made by a company called Inslaw, that was stolen by the head of the Israeli Mossad. And they had a backdoor installed in the software. This is a software that allowed them to plant porn on your computer or mine, or take money out of our bank account, or make things appear or disappear on radar, or make your phone lines not work. It's a real interesting thing. So here we have the startup company. Now, interesting characters. We've got a big financial guy from Lebanon who's supporting this P-Tech company, this 3-year-old startup company. And we've got another one from Saudi Arabia. That's the only person I saw. He was just a financial backer. And then their marketing guy who got into all of the computers through Michael Chertoff, who's also a dual citizen with Israel, was called Michael Goff. And Michael Goff just coincidentally looks exactly like twins to a character that was on Flight 93 called Jeremy Glick. Jeremy Glick was an interesting character, 6'2", 225-pound judo champion. And instead of taking care of the 5'6" hijackers that day, he sat on the phone to his wife on Flight 93 until they decided to take over the cockpit away from the flight attendants first, and then the hijackers.
Right.
It's an interesting story. So again, another connection. Also on Flight 93, there was another Jewish man killed, stabbed, named Mark Rothenberg. And so it's just kind of interesting. You see these things, it's I'm a really good person for dissecting things and looking for groupings, things that don't, one of these things is not like the other, that show.
Yeah.
And so I'm one of those people that can pick stuff out like, oh, that's the same here. And so that's kind of how I used this, is putting all of these people together and going, well, that's an interesting coincidence. There's another dual citizen here. Well, interesting. So anyway, I kind of sidetracked on your questions. So I'm sorry.
No, that's okay.
But it's just so amazing that I found all this, and I went into doing this research. I heard the official story. I couldn't get any answers from the FAA or for the company that I worked for. And how did this happen? Here's the most important question that should have been answered by all of the flight attendants that called in. How did someone get in the cockpit? Because that's what we would want to avoid ever happening again. How? They kicked the door in. They got a cockpit key from someone. They came on board with one. Maybe they're already on a jump seat. There had to be a reason how they got in there, a method. And that was the key factor that no one ever said, how they got in. How is the most important detail a flight attendant could have said that day. And we already knew they were in the cockpit. How did they get in? That's how you would want to.
Right. Absolutely.
So anyway, did I answer?
Do you have a theory about that?
well, they didn't need to be. You see, with the flight termination system,
right, that's
taken over from the ground.
Yeah.
And you see, we run our drones in Afghanistan, Pakistan, Yemen, Oman. That's quite a ways away. In case you haven't ever been there, it's a long journey. We run those from Creech Air Force Base, mostly in Nevada, just north of Las Vegas. I mean, that's a big drone control base. And so it's not like they had to be on board. They could have had, I'm sure they did have not hijackers, but handlers. Now, I've been contacted since the book came out by some people from American and United that swear up and down that the official, the real passenger manifest never had one Arab name on them.
Wow.
And so there's another interesting thing that I found out later too, again, after because I'm still researching, but that the first 72 hours after this 9/11 event, when the original people that the FBI claimed were the part of the 19, there were 4 of them. They changed them out somewhere in that first 72 hours. Well, America was unfurling our flags and oiling our guns, looking to see who were those people that we were going to kill. We needed to get rid of somebody, and we're going to war. Tell me who to shoot, right? I mean, everybody was reacting this way and traumatized. We weren't paying attention to these details. But there are these 4 characters, and now the FBI originally claimed that these names were on the passenger manifest. One of the things I found was the FBI has lied and lied and lied and covered up all of this information. I'm reading it in an FBI document. You've never heard these details unless you've heard an interview or read the book. I mean, I hadn't read them before or heard them, and I paid close attention. It was my world.
How did you get these
secret documents.
You know, I found them online actually, and they're not secret. They're I can send you a link to them. Anybody that's listening, you can email me off my website, methodicalillusion.com. There's a contact Rebekah, and there's a button on the homepage where you can just click and it'll shoot me an email and fill in your information. So if you want the PDF, it's in a PDF I found online. And I found women involved, not necessarily 19 hijackers that were men from Saudi Arabia or someplace. But here's the interesting thing. That first 72 hours, the original FBI statement was that there were these 4 other individuals who are not listed right now on Wikipedia as the 19. The 2 of the guys, the same last name was called Bukhari, and I think it was Bhukari was their last name. Adnan and Amir, I think, were their names. Okay. Well, interestingly enough, one of those brothers, I believe it was Adnan, if I remember correctly, is an FAA employee in aviation security. He showed up alive when he found out he was being fingered on the worldwide television as a terrorist and dead. And he's an FAA aviation specialist in Florida. So he shows up, and the other guy, his brother, who they claimed was also on another plane, or they were on the same plane. I don't remember their fake story, but this is what the FBI was doing to us. Wow. And most of us don't even know this. They were claiming that these 2 brothers were on the passenger manifest, and they were, hijackers for at least one of the planes, or maybe they're on 2 planes. But his brother had been dead for a year and died in a Cessna type small aircraft crash in Florida a year before. Oddly enough, on September 11th, 2000. And then there were 2 other guys, same last name. I just don't recall what it is. And it's kind of a longer, Middle Eastern, type of name. I just don't recall. It's just not that important because they showed up alive too.
It's almost like they're just kind of like swapping names just to create this facade.
A lot. Yeah, that's true. A lot of the hijackers kind of had the same type of name.
Right. Mm-hmm. And it just seems like it's to fabricate this whole story. But in terms of just getting back to just the flights in general, at least the 2 that hit the tower specifically, in terms of like a timeline. So are you suggesting that when, normal flight takes off and they were detoured, or maybe they took a quick landing somewhere and then meanwhile...
I'll tell you what happened.
Okay.
The first 2 planes, Flight 11 and Flight 175, American and United, took off from Boston. We know that Flight 11 had 2 flight attendants calling out at approximately 20 to 21 minutes after departure from Boston. So they didn't get very far. Here's something else I know, that aircraft, full of fuel, needs at least a 10,000-foot long runway. They needed to go someplace where there weren't other passengers and the general public. Mm-hmm. And all of the phone calls work. And what I found was a C-5 transport base that was used for reserves only. It had an 11,595-foot runway. Mm-hmm. It's within 20 minutes of Boston. It's within the exact time of the phone calls that were made from Flight 77 and Flight 93. All of the calls were made from cell phones or airphones or office phones, whatever phones, on the ground, in a hangar. There are 5 or 6 gigantic hangars at this location that will accommodate aircraft like a C-5. If C-5 transport's larger than a 747, it's the one you see on the Theraflu commercial that's playing right now, that the whole nose opens up. Mm-hmm. And you see, what was the guy's name that did the the video where, what was it, Christmas time, where he was standing on the wingtips? It was, what's his name? Chuck Norris or some one of those one of those type of characters. Yeah, those are C-5 transports. They're huge, actually. And I used to fly a lot of military charters, and we'd go into an Air Force base, and the guys you think that 747's big. Look at how tiny it looks next to this C-5. So what I did was I found, and I teach the reader how to do this. There's a website online where you can go and punch in airport codes, and it'll tell you how long it takes to get there from pushback to gate in, pretty much. And you can put in wings, wind, speed, whether it's seasonal, none, light winds, whatever, and a little pull-down menus. And I really teach the reader step by step exactly how to do this and find out what time those phone calls were made. Again, like I said, 2 people were taken off of each aircraft once they got on the ground. And in order to understand this, I wish I could just plug in all my 30 years of being a flight attendant and understanding the psychology of crew members and how when we put on our uniform, our job is one thing and one thing only. That is your safety as a passenger and the safety of our aircraft. That's our first and foremost. When we stop being a mom and a sister and a good neighbor next door, and we become your gatekeeper. We are your safety, whether you have a heart attack, whether you get burned, whether you need to be evacuated in water, on land, in foam, or in a hijacking. We are there to protect you, the passengers. And so that's our job. And so in order for these handlers, I refer to them as, because there weren't 19 Arab hijackers on, there were these handlers. These are trained people, kind of like that guy 9B, the trained assassin. He was similar to that. Yeah. He actually had this kind of training, as a matter of fact. He was a hostage rescue specialist and an anti-hijacking specialist. So he was highly trained to do this, and he knew exactly what would happen in a hijacking because and that's what he trained for. So he knew lots of stuff. But what they didn't know was how the FAA trained us. And they also didn't know this. They didn't know that in America, we are not referred to as airline hostesses.
Right.
But, if you do a quick Google search on El Al, airline hostess, look at the images. You can't do that with Delta, because we're called flight attendants since 1968. Before that, we were called stewardesses. And one of the passengers on Flight 175, Peter Hansen, 32-year-old gentleman, so all of his life he'd been hearing us workers in airplanes called flight attendants, his entire lifetime. And he calls in at 3 minutes before impact to the South Tower, Flight 175, supposedly. And he says to his dad, the airline hostess has been stabbed. And I went, what? No American speaks that way.
Yeah, airline hostess.
Okay, there was another huge red flag that whoever was writing the script was used to calling us airline hostesses. So that's very, okay, it's a big red flag. Okay, let me just say that. And so then I'm thinking, okay, this is 3 minutes before impact. And then he said something else. He says to his dad, I think the hijackers are going to fly us to Chicago. 3 minutes before impact, visualize Manhattan, because that's what he would be seeing out his window.
Yeah.
And look how low they had to be 3 minutes before departure. We can see that airplane coming in. It's not very high. We think they're going to fly the airplane to Chicago and fly us into a building. And I thought to myself that at that time, this is like 14 minutes after something hit the North Tower. 14 minutes. There's no way they knew on board, because we didn't know on the ground until after something hit the South Tower what was going on. I mean, some people thought that was a missile that hit the North Tower. Some people thought it was a helicopter, small aircraft. Nobody thought it was a 767. All the eyewitnesses originally reported it was a small aircraft or a military aircraft, and the police were getting reports that it was a missile fired from the Woolworth building. So here he's telling us, and I thought, well, shoot, somebody told him the scenario, just like Betty Ong said, we're the first. Somebody told her your plane's the first of 4 aircraft. Well, what I've deduced with a lot of flight attendants and pilots that have come forward, what we collectively have deduced is the handlers told the crew members and the passengers that they were part of an ongoing war game that day. There were more than a dozen U.S. military war games taking place on the morning of 9/11. Some of them were actually war games drilling of airplanes crashing into buildings, including FEMA, who was in downtown New York in Manhattan, just down the street. They'd all arrived on February 10th to do a drill on February 11th.
February?
September 11th. Sorry, February. Where did that come from? And so you see that I might have read that in February because it's just in there somewhere.
Right.
But you see, there was all of these drills going on, and the only way that you could commandeer our aircraft from us as pilots and flight attendants is to say, okay, you're part of an ongoing drill. We're drilling the FAA, Air Traffic Control, or NORAD. We've taken over your plane remotely, and we're going to take 2 people off the aircraft to make these phone calls. Now,
so this is requiring a lot of deception just on the account of the passengers and the airline hostesses.
Well, I think what happened, from what I can see, and I've got the radar data now. I've got a terabyte of radar data and other information from flight from 9/11. So what I'm dissecting now is that these planes were taken over when they left Boston, and they were landed there, and real quickly. And the pilots, you see, they would be, and the flight attendants too. The aircraft would be ascending to 35,000 feet. Let's just say. And that's going to take you, roughly 20 minutes or thereabouts, depending upon the traffic on, climb out of Boston. And so instead of that, at around 8:13 or so on Flight 11, actually, the flight termination system takes over and it starts the aircraft descending. The pilots and the flight attendants can't speak to each other. The pilots can't speak to anybody on the ground. They don't know what's going on, but their aircraft is landing itself. And now, pilots knew that this thing was on there, but it was on in the event of a hijacking, and a hijacker was in the cockpit, not the pilot sitting there. So they would have immediately thought that it was a mechanical, that for some reason they were losing altitude and they're descending. At some point, whether it was when they got on the ground or at that point, but listen, a hijack specialist, a hostage rescue person, they know exactly where our PA is and where it works, because that's one of the first things they would do when they liberate the aircraft. They would come on and grab the PA system and tell all the passengers to be seated. There's a SWAT team on board. Everyone, please seize it. Or they would tell them to put their head down. Or they know where the PA system is. It's not something that it would be foreign to them. So maybe before they land, the handlers on board made an announcement. And they either used a cell phone jammer, because on Flight 11, there were nearly 100 passengers and crew members. And only 2 people made phone calls. What we believe happened, and this is collectively with people from United and American and myself, with many, many, many years of history with the airline, to collectively hundreds, and pilots that knew these people, the crew members, personally. And that they were most likely told by the handlers that they were part of a drill, and they either used a cell phone jammer, or they, before they landed, collected all the cell phones. Probably a cell phone jammer, because that way, if somebody kept a phone, they couldn't get through. And so that's what they did. They said, we need 2 people to make phone calls, and those 2 people were taken off the aircraft. And why I say that is, I still got you on, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Why I say that is that the 2 flight attendants, Amy Sweeney and Betty Ong from Flight 11, were also giving totally conflicting information. In a hijacking, one of the important things for us to do is to give whoever we're talking to on the ground specific information about the type of weapons, if they have guns. I mean, we know the ingredients of a bomb. We know what certain guns are. We would give information, detailed information of what was going on. And the details were not ever given correctly. And so one of the things that I noticed is Amy Sweeney was saying that a doctor and a nurse were tending to 9B, the guy who'd been stabbed. And Betty Ong was saying we requested, through the PA, we asked for medical personnel, and there isn't anyone on board to help. Now that's very conflicting information.
Right.
And also Amy Sweeney said that Betty Ong and her were both seated in the second to the last row in coach. Keep in mind, this is the aircraft, 767 is what they're on, is 159 feet long from the cockpit door to the tail, to the end of the aisle. So they're in the second to the last row. They're about 150 feet away from the cockpit and the hijackers and the stabbed guy who was up in business class.
Right.
So it's really, that's a very long distance to know what's going on. And the fact that Amy Sweeney said they were both sitting there together, but yet Betty Ong said at least 10 times she was seated at 3R, her jump seat. They're very different. You're either in a coach seat or you're in a jump seat, but you're not there You know that I'm saying they're saying different things that are conflicting.
Right. Yeah.
And so I saw a lot of conflict between these two flight attendants on that very first flight, which told me that this was not what was going on. And then when I followed through things like on Flight 93 where, well, let me touch first before I go on Flight 93. Also on Flight 175, there was another interesting guy that called in at the same time Peter Hansen that called us airline hostess. The same time he called 9 o'clock, 3 minutes before impact South Tower. He's an F-14 pilot, according to the official story in the FBI documents. I later found out that he's not really a pilot from someone whose husband flew with him. He was a radar specialist. And he sat in the back seat of an F-14, I guess. So the FBI calls him an F-14 pilot. Miramar trained San Diego, Top Gun school. That's where the Blue Angels train. Mm-hmm. I actually flew with some. So according to this story, he calls his mommy at 9 o'clock, 3 minutes before impact. She asks him, where are you? And he says he's over Ohio. Well, from Boston to Ohio is an hour and 50 minutes. And this flight now is in the air for about 45, maybe 44 minutes. He should know where he's at. He's looking out the window. What does he see? Manhattan. Right. He's a pilot. And I thought, well, now that's really odd. And then he says something else. He says, well, we're thinking a bunch of us passengers, this is 8 minutes after supposedly they've figured out they're hijacked. A bunch of us passengers are talking about taking over the cockpit. And I went, hey, wait a minute. That's the scenario from Flight 93 where they created all the heroes. And shortly after, they made a movie. They wrote a couple books. And do you know, interestingly enough, most of the women that were married to the heroes, let's roll kind of guys on Flight 93, all got big book contracts from big publishers. And the movie was made, don't forget, Flight 93. I think they made two movies. I think they did a TV movie and then a Hollywood theater movie.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, interesting. So, yeah, I just put all this stuff together and I just went, wait a minute. Again, we are highly trained in a hijacking. There are specific things we do and do not do. Right. And one of the things that I noticed is when Tom Burnett called in to his wife, the ex-flight attendant, the retired flight attendant, she told him one of those things, word for word FAA protocol. She said, Tom, sit down and do not draw attention to yourself. And that is word for word FAA protocol. And she's a flight attendant. That's how I knew this. She really was a flight attendant. She knew word for word our protocol to follow. That's what a flight attendant would have done. And yet on Flight 11, we're expected to believe that some of the flight attendants were walking up and down the aisles, bringing Betty Ong information of what was going on in coach. Right. That is impossible. That would not have happened.
Well, no, what do you think happened to the people that made the phone calls if they were, either pulled out, being told it's a drill or, read this, maybe forced to or whatnot, whatever the situation. And then what happened to the rest of the passengers, do you think?
Well, you know how the Illuminati, who they are, the cabal, likes to give us a little tickler, a little heads up, like The Lone Gunman was put out March of 2001, where they, that TV show where they were flying a plane into the World Trade Center.
Sure.
That kind of stuff. Well, as I was going through all of the phone calls from the passengers and the flight attendants, there were certain words and phrases used, mace or pepper spray being one of them. So we collectively, the airline people, professionals that have contacted me, and I've had many conversations since the book came out, believe that those two people were taken off the aircraft and that more than likely some type of canister of something more lethal than pepper spray or mace was put inside the cabin. If the flight crews, the flight attendants, were told they were part of a drill, we commonly drill at our recurrent training with smoke bombs. And to simulate smoke in the cabin, we use smoke goggles and use smoke machines, like fog making machines. So we practice. So we know what those yellow or red and white lights on the aisleway that we always point to before takeoff, where you're going to go follow your exits. We know what they look like when the cabin's full of black smoke. This is the kind of things we do in our training. And so if they would have been told that, and the only reason the pilots and the flight attendants wouldn't have fought the handlers back is that they were told they were part of a drill. If they would have used some kind of gas like that, they would have pulled the people off to make the phone calls, and then those people in the aircraft would have been taken out by something more lethal than pepper spray.
Right. Wow. So now I'm getting
a lot of pieces to a puzzle here. And, really, really fascinating. A lot of this stuff, your perspective is totally new. I'm sure somebody has told you that before, but to hear this from somebody with as much insight on that part of the whole situation is actually really, really fascinating. I am having a little bit of trouble, though. What do you think the actual collision was? You mentioned that the video didn't look right. You mentioned that the plane looked like one of those tankers you're talking about, and we've got remote control systems, but then we've got these planes and hangars. What do you think actually happened to the towers? Because there's a lot of theories and evidence about demolition as well.
Yeah, and there are so many crazy theories. What I set out to find was what happened to the real planes and the passengers and crew members.
Right.
And I found that. And what's been interesting is I have so many United and American, these are the two airlines that were involved, and pilots that are actually buying the book by cases now and handing them out.
Wow.
And they're 100% certain that this is exactly how it happened. I found all the players, how it was covered up. Just also so you know, this company, P-Tech and MITRE, that were in the FAA headquarters, they had a job that day. There were over a dozen military war games going on. And so one of their jobs was to make aircraft bogeys or targets for the military war games appear and disappear on different radar. So we had a lot of confusion at one point on 9/11. There were 11 suspected hijackings out there, and air traffic controllers had no idea what was real and what was make-believe because there were all these war games going on, and that was their job, P-Tech and MITRE. And remember P-Tech, they had that backdoor in that software, the Promise software. They could make things appear and disappear without anybody even knowing that they were in their computer screen. Right. That includes NORAD and the FAA air traffic control radar screens. So we had at one point, one of the fighter jets that finally scrambled downtown New York at 9:24 was seeing what he believed was tagged as Flight 11, which crashed supposedly at 8:46. At 9:24, he thought he saw them on his radar screen in his plane heading south of New York toward Washington, D.C. Now, that's 45 minutes after it crashed. But there was a lot of confusion because we had these two companies that had access to all the radar screens. They could make planes appear and disappear. So when the flight termination system took over, they could just upload radar data. And I have tons of it now on an external hard drive, that they could upload that into the FAA computer systems and make those airplanes look like they went to Cleveland or anywhere else.
Wow.
And that's how it was done, and that's the companies involved. And again, that rabbit hole takes you right back to a Middle Eastern country that is not an Arab country. And they're also very infiltrated into our national security because they have access through that back door to just about everything, including all of our weaponry.
Right. Well,
it's pretty sobering, actually, what I found. Yeah, it's just amazing and mind-blowing, actually. Listen, when I made the discovery that I kept going back to those phone calls had to have been made on the ground. Flight 93, most of the calls they claimed were from cell phones. And right. Tom Burnett called his wife at 9:27 a.m. The flight wasn't officially hijacked until 9:28. Somehow 1 minute prior to the hijacking, he was already calling his wife, telling her all the details of a hijacking. Wow. So there was a little problem. Not only did the hijackers, the planners, the handlers, whatever you want to call them, the perps, I call them perpetrators sometimes, not only did they not know how we are trained and the code words we would use and how we would react in a hijacking, I'm saying flight attendants and pilots, airline crew members. But they also didn't realize that cell phones don't work at altitude. So that told me they were used to flying on maybe like Air Force One type of planes where they actually have phone. They can talk on cell phones or any kind of phones. Leaders, prime ministers of countries, for example, that are going from A to B on their 747 or their 757, they're equipped with all kinds of communication abilities, including talking on any kind of phone. Yeah. So to them, they didn't even realize that cell phones don't work at altitude. So there were flaws in their plan. So to me, it actually started to look like a B movie written in Hollywood by someone who doesn't understand how an airplane, airline, or crew members all function together.
Yeah. Well, you'd think if they were trying to pull off such an enormous hoax here that they would have found somebody to write a better script for them.
I said that exact same thing to my husband, but they control the media, so they write the script. Speaking of scripts, let me just mention something else to you that's very interesting. If you want to look up something interesting, look up Sayeret Matkal, and I think it's spelled Sayretmatkal. Yep. And you look and see that there's two other interesting characters that were also trained assassins, Bibi Netanyahu.
Yep.
And Ehud Barak. And you'll remember Ehud Barak was in New York on September 10th, 2001, downtown New York. And the morning of 9/11, he was in the BBC studios. He's actually the man who coined the phrase war on terror. He's the one who first told us this was Osama bin Laden who did this. And he's the one who wrote the script for Jane Stanley, who made an announcement at 5 o'clock, 20 minutes before the Solomon Building, a.k.a. Building 7, collapsed, that it had already collapsed 20 minutes before it did. And it's standing right behind her as she's standing in a building strategically placed with the Solomon Building right over her shoulder. Now, that's who wrote the script. She's just reading a teleprompter, much like the president does.
Right.
And so
wait, she's announcing the building has collapsed when you can see it right behind her?
That's correct.
Oh my gosh, I got to refresh on my 9/11 stuff.
Yeah, that's now, one of the most incriminating. I remember hearing that, and I mean that alone should, anyone who's even skeptical at all of the whole thing should
well, interesting. We have Sayeret Matkal as a passenger 9B who was originally tagged as the hijacker on board. Mm-hmm. We have Ehud Barak as Sayeret Matkal, ex-prime minister who'd been flying around on airplanes with cell reception in the BBC studios telling them that the Building 7's going to collapse before it did, and wrote the script and put it in a teleprompter 20 minutes before it did. How did he know that?
And just so you know, Rebekah, our audience is primarily a Christian audience, and we do have a lot of listeners that are more of the traditional support Israel type. So I think you've been.
This is a wake up call, I guess, for him, because unfortunately, it's really easy for us as very programmed Americans. We're very programmed. We're very brainwashed as a nation to sit and say that 4 professional airline pilots from Saudi Arabia, or 2 pilots and an engineer at I forget what they did, engineer at an oil factory or something in Riyadh, that 19 Arabs that weren't on board would give us the ability to hate Muslims.
Right.
And to go kill more than probably 5 million people in the Middle East. Because another interesting thing that I found about these phone calls, and this is again something I would never have done in 30 years, I would never have described someone using this term. He's of Middle Eastern descent, unless he came on wearing a robe from Saudi Arabia or Kuwait, one of those white outfits that they wear.
Right.
With the checkerboard thing on their head. Unless it was something like that, I would never be able to. I can't tell if somebody's Hispanic, Persian, Turkish. I mean, you just can't tell. I mean, when I would fly from Europe to the United States, I'd have over 60 different languages and probably 80 different cultures. I would never in my lifetime have said someone was of Middle Eastern descent unless they were wearing the customary clothing. It's just impossible to look at someone like that.
And it's such a formal sort of description of somebody.
Yeah, it's not how we talk. Yeah. Again, it's like the airline hostess. That's not how we speak. And so what was happening for me is I was seeing all these, everyone saying the same thing. Jeremy Glick, the judo champion, 6'2", 225 pounds, black belt judo champ, 33 years old.
Right.
He claimed they were Iranians. I'm like, how would you know that?
Right. And just, for our listeners, just so more information that they may not be familiar with, but on, I believe either the day or the day after the towers were hit, Benjamin Netanyahu was asked about the event, and he said, quote, "It's very good." And then he credited himself and he said, "Well, not very good, but it will generate immediate sympathy." So
yeah, it's very good for Israel, he said. Yeah. Well, interesting. You're talking about people that they get caught up and they don't want to believe that some force in Israel was a part of this and deal with that reality. But here's what happened when I did one of the very first interviews when the book came out, and I laid this out there because I didn't go in thinking it was anybody other than the 19 Arab hijackers. I was programmed just like everyone else was, and so was my character. I mean, I didn't think I was going to find Jews, Catholics, Protestants, or any, Buddhists. I just didn't have any preconceived notion. It's just coincidentally that I started finding all of these dual citizens with Israel, not anywhere else. If I would have found Iranians, I'd have told you that. But I didn't. I didn't find any Greeks or any French. I just found dual citizens with Israel connected at the bottom of every single rabbit hole I went down. I went down every one of them.
Right.
But this lady contacted me through email, and she said, "My husband and I are born-again Christians, and we have a real hard time dealing with Israel being a part of this. But then we realized that the Jews of Israel are no more a part of the Mossad." Keep in mind, the Mossad's like their Israeli secret.
Right. Their CIA.
It's like CIA.
Yeah.
It's their CIA, right? So she says the Jews in Israel, or the Jews of the Bible, the Jewish people, are no more a part of the Mossad than we as Americans are of the CIA, or, heaven forbid, Blackwater, or the black ops people who have spun off from our CIA and FBI.
Right.
And that's very true. And I think people need to deal with that, because you need to know who's doing this. The same people that control our media, so they've got the message. That's how nobody in our media ever let out the fact that at least two women were involved in this as hijackers.
And just to kind of build on that too, a lot of people are here, have accepted that the world is run by some pretty shady figures, that there are things happening in the shadows, that America is being controlled by something else, by Russia and China are not necessarily what they think they are. But then the second you mention the governmental decisions of Israel, it's almost like they forget that that the same dark forces controlling other governments in the world, and when I say dark forces, I mean Illuminati or whatever, the shadow government, that they couldn't possibly be controlling Israel.
Right. And you get labeled anti-Semitic.
Yeah.
Very
so it's
quickly.
not necessarily, it's not about anti-Semitism. It's not about
the truth.
It's not about the Jewish people as a people. It's about, the same shadowy people controlling the entire world, and Israel is not immune to that.
Well, for me, like I said, I went into this and it was truly all about the truth. And that's all I wanted to find was the truth. And, if I would have found Catholics or Iranians, I would be telling you right now about them. But that was my mission, was to find the truth of what happened to the planes and the passengers and who was at the control. All you have to do now, look back. Hindsight is always 20/20. Always. It never fails. It is always 20/20. And who benefited? Like I said, what terrorist group would have benefited from the exact offices that were investigating the comptroller of the United States Pentagon, Rabbi Dov Zakheim? What group in the Middle East, what terrorist group would have benefited from that investigation? Not only that investigation, but in Building 7, did you know that the Enron, the Global Crossing, and the, what was it called? WorldCom. Remember, those were big, huge scandals. All of their investigation, all of their evidence was held in Building 7. It is all gone and it all disappeared.
Right.
And there was something else that I found that I didn't get any of this information from the media. But there was something else going on that the senior Bush, George Bush Sr., had, as part of the destruction of the Soviet Union, created these Brady bonds. They were created with stolen physical gold and fake gold paper bonds, just out of thin air. $240 billion worth of stolen gold had to be funneled back into the heavily monitored gold market. And they were expiring on September 12th, 2001.
Right.
They were held in Cantor Fitzgerald, exactly the target office.
Wow.
And you'll remember that the two companies, Marsh & McLennan and Cantor Fitzgerald, were actually where the airplanes or whatever it was went into. So getting back to answering your question about what did hit those towers, there's a great presentation, if you've ever heard Barbara Honegger give, about the Pentagon and how multiple sources inside the Pentagon claim that there were multiple explosions going off, much like you hear people from the towers say that there were bombs going off in the lobby and the basement levels before the planes hit. There were set explosives going off prior to the aircraft hitting or whatever it was that hit. Same at the Pentagon. Nothing hit in Shanksville. I don't know what they shot down. They could have shot down one of their drones, but there's never been a serial number stamped aircraft part, and every single solitary piece of an airplane has a serial number stamped to it. So, right. I mean, that's just what happens. And when there's a plane crash, sometimes people try. There's actually I hate to say this, but an Israeli Mossad operation that went down when American Airlines crashed a plane in Colombia. They went down and pilfered all the parts that they could, and they were up in Seattle, Tacoma area, trying to sell these parts, which is where Boeing is based, and selling these parts. Well, all those parts are
serial numbered. And so they got busted. Actually, the guy that was busting them got murdered. Oh, yikes.
Yeah, he's I forgot his last name now, but that ended that investigation. But yeah, there was a band of people. They'd gone in Colombia and swooped in and pulled all of these parts off of this, and it was a 757, because there is a theory that some of those parts were actually dropped over the Pentagon or into the Pentagon or released inside the Pentagon. Maybe there was just a box of parts in the building. Who knows? I don't know. But that's just a theory that there's that serial number. But the actual 4 aircraft that were involved that day that we are led to believe crashed, never one part of the matching serial number has ever come forward. That's kind of interesting, because when you study, look at what they did with TWA 800. They brought that aircraft up out of the ocean and put it back together. Right. That's what the NTSB usually does. Black boxes don't disappear, but what we just saw with German wings. Mm-hmm. Now, this is interesting. If I have enough time, I'll tell you this.
Sure.
When the Airbus came out and we first started flying Airbus here in the United States, something interesting happened. And you'll remember that an Airbus crashed in the air show in Paris, I believe it was. And around the same time when they were kind of new aircraft coming out. Well, we had them. We were started to fly them. And I know the company that I worked for, which I never disclose, just for my own safety, just so you know. Our pilots were landing. Actually, I believe they were in D.C. a couple times, Washington, D.C. And the aircraft decided on its own it would take off. It's like HAL, the computer on 2001 Space Odyssey. I'm taking off now, Jim. So what happened was, of course, the FAA comes in and they investigate this, because I know it happened more than once, because I'm pretty sure it happened 2 or 3 times just on one airline. And they investigated it. And you know what they did? They ended up finding out that what they claimed did this, created the aircraft. The Airbus is just a one computer system, doesn't have redundancies like the Boeing. That the computer system was tickled by a Walkman disc man playing a disc by a passenger sitting in the front row of first class. And now, just so you know that how a CD is read is through a laser.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so that's how hypersensitive. And at that point, the FAA, that's the only thing they could claim did this to the Airbus. And that's when they created that you can't use your electronic devices until we're above 10,000 feet. That's the only reason.
A CD player.
And that's how sensitive that Airbus could be. Just so you know, after 9/11, the cockpit door, which was just kind of a maybe, just a regular little door. You probably saw them. They were pretty just thin, like a bathroom door, pretty much, on a plane, lavatory door. Well, once the 9/11 happened, immediately they started replacing those with, check this out, a grenade-proof door. Just imagine a grenade going off up there. I mean, the whole fuselage would fall apart. So grenade-proof, I thought that was a little overkill. But gun-proof and grenade-proof. It's like the whole cabin's not. I mean, the fuselage isn't grenade-proof. You can actually do a lot of damage just with a gun up there. So if you blow a window out or put a hole in the fuselage, right? So I just thought that was really amazing that they made these things so like that. But on the outside of the door is an electronic keypad. And each airline can put in their code, 4 digits, 6 digits, whatever. And so I knew that the captain, when he went out to go tinkle, he actually had a keypad to get back in. And that unlocks the door, and then you have to push the door in because it just unlocks it.
Right.
And they turn the handle and push in. And so I know how those doors work because I flew with them for a few years after 9/11. And I thought, his electronic keypad didn't work. And immediately I came following CERN and Anthony Patch and all of that information on CERN because I'm pretty concerned about it. And I thought, wow, remember when the Airbus and that reaction was to a Discman? Well, what's going on over there?
Right.
And then the Alps, a lot of times they're made out of like granite or crystal type things. And so I'm thinking, wow, I don't know what their makeup is of it, but they could be highly conductive to what's going on with CERN, the magnetic stuff that's coming out of there.
Right.
And if you'll remember, right before that, CERN was kind of bragging that they were going to be up by the 30th or 31st of March at full speed.
Yeah.
They were going to be up at like 13.
It was up to, I mean, they said as high as 17. I've been tracking the whole CERN thing, but one of the interesting things about that flight also that I pointed out in one of my videos was that Yvonne Selke and her daughter were killed in the crash, and they were contracted, or at least Yvonne was contracted with the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency. And she was part of Booz Allen Hamilton. They had funded $315 million for some projects that they were doing with the NG, I guess it's called the NGA. So very interesting that she was on the flight.
Yeah, I saw that. And, just to bring it back to 9/11, NGA, on the day of 9/11, their particular drill at their office there at the end of the runway, I believe they're right off of Dulles runway, or National maybe. Their particular drill was actually an aircraft hitting their building.
Wow.
And Booz Allen Hamilton, that's Edward Snowden, went to work for them.
That's right.
Rabbi Dov Zakheim went to work at Booz Allen Hamilton.
All the dots connect.
So you see, it all comes around full circle. And yes, I did see that. And that's one of the first things I look at. It's the same I did with MH370.
Right. And also
MH370 was probably taken to Diego Garcia.
Yeah. And also the, I guess one of the CIA leaders, or I can't remember if he was the head guy or not, but he was in charge of the NGA, announced that he was stepping down just a week before the German Wings flight went down. So,
Exactly.
it's a little shady, but
Yeah. One of the things I noticed that for just my own personal thing is, I was living in that cognitive dissonance bubble. I didn't want to know the truth. I wanted to, label people. You're a hater. You're an anti-Semite. You're a whatever. I mean, I didn't want to deal with the truth. I was in there. I was there. And so was my main character of the book. When you wake up to the truth in 9/11, what you do wake up to is the fact that this Illuminati, this Luciferian cult is in fact nationwide. It's in every single solitary government entity on this planet. And one of the things that CERN quite possibly is doing, I mean, that symmetry dance, that dance of destruction they did was the Illuminati never does anything without letting you know.
Yeah.
And what I found is when you wake up to the 9/11 truth, then you start to open, it's like a veil is lifted and you start to see through their story. And the story is the same over and over again. For instance, on 9/11, we had only 2 out of nearly 250 people that all carried passports, only 2 passports made out of paper, no titanium engine parts, no landing gear, nothing from an aircraft, no black boxes that don't disintegrate. Nothing but 2 paper passports, not from an American, not from a pilot, not from a flight attendant, but from the fake hijackers that weren't even on board.
Yeah.
Only those. And then if you look at that and remember that, also at Charlie Hebdo in Paris, we had 2 highly trained. You know, see the media here was saying, oh, they're highly trained. You can tell by the way they carry their guns. As you watch that little video snippet where they shot that guy that didn't bleed on the sidewalk, that ricocheted their bullets off the cement, not his head.
Right, yeah.
And then what did they do? They left their ID. Now, who wouldn't do a terrorist attack like they pulled off and bring their ID with them?
Yeah.
And leave it in a. Now, this is really interesting because I kind of got into studying this too, because like I said, that veil has been lifted and now I can see clearly what is going on around me. And that's what happens with people that read the Methodical Illusion and they contact me and they say, oh, it's just the same thing over and over. And just so you know, I am a Christian, by the way, and Lucifer may be in charge, but he also isn't very clever. He can only do things over and over and over again. So you're going to see these things, that paper passport, the ID, the same things over and over and over again, so that there's no question we'll leave our identification in a stolen car. By the way, the cars that they stole, they carjacked 2 cars in Paris. They brought one of the cars in front of a bakery that is a Mossad meeting place in Paris, and they stole a car from Charlie Hebdo's editor's best friend, and that's where they left their ID. And again, much like 9/11, it's Mossad connected to everything. I didn't do it. I didn't write their script. I'm just telling you the story. I'm just a researcher. I mean, you can't call me an anti-Semite. I didn't choose their religion. I didn't pick their careers. I didn't create the story. Right. I just picked it apart using common sense, knowledge, and just an open mind. And you know, it's interesting. I haven't really been called an anti-Semite. And quite frankly, if people do that, they have an issue. And so
I wouldn't think anybody could. It's just the whole Israel thing is so sensitive, and people, they group together just Jewishness and the government of Israel. Whereas, you can disagree with the government. And not
also, if you want to pull out a King James and look at Revelation 2:9 and just ponder on that.
2:9 and 3:9.
And 3:9. Who ever on the surface of this planet, who besides the Zionist government of Israel, the Zionists, the Ashkenazi, who has ever called themselves Jews and are not? And when it mentions the synagogue of Satan, you'll notice in Revelations it refers to churches and the synagogue of Satan. You look at synagogue of Satan and just put it all together. If you do just a little surface research into the Illuminati, Lucifer, the satanic cults of the Freemasons, Adam Weishaupt, the Illuminati creator, and all of those things and what they've done throughout history. And when I'm older than you guys, but when I was a kid, John Kennedy was shot. And I remember growing up, and I was pretty young when that happened, but when I grew up, I remember hearing this phrase, the military-industrial complex killed him. And I never knew what that meant until I did 9/11 research. And you find people and corporations involved, like the Mitre Company. Mitre Company is also the shadow government. And you can do a quick search. Just go onto their websites and they'll tell you all they do. They run everything from the IRS to our Obamacare healthcare and everything in between. Classic. These are all companies like Booz Allen Hamilton, same type of thing. Right. Halliburton, same type of deal. They reached $3 to $6 billion on making uniforms, making vaccines, making weapons, guns, tanks, planes, whatever. And all of those corporations were involved or had passengers or handlers on board all of the aircraft on 9/11.
Wow.
And, I didn't write the script. I just read what happened. I just uncovered it. It's like, okay.
No, this is really, really fascinating. I mean, again, I said it before, but, I've never heard such a breakdown of the events of 9/11 from the perspective that you have. And so, you can go ahead and send us a copy of your book, and I can enjoy that. So, first of all,
2 hours into the conversation.
First of all, no. Okay, so
finally get a word in edgewise.
No. I just want to ask you, you obviously feel strongly that this book is a powerful thing for people to help open people up. Would you suggest it to kind of people who haven't woken up yet, or let's talk about your book for just a second.
Yeah. Well, the feedback I'm getting are people have given it, the 9/11 whole thing has created a lot of disharmony in homes and families, and even extended families. And people got together at Thanksgiving and got in huge arguments for the 14th year or maybe the 10th year. I think a lot of people started waking up when Stephen Jones came forward with finding nanothermite in the dust. And then people started to think, wait a minute, was there something more to this? And when you started seeing scholars come out and people like Dr. Judy Wood coming forward with other possibilities of techniques that might have been used on those towers, because they were huge and something really big had to have happened to make sure they came down the way that they did. And so when people the veil started to lift for a lot of different scholars, and people were looking at it, wait a minute, that's denying physics. They started to kind of wake up to something else is happening here. And what happened is that people, the truthers, we'll call them, that started to wake up to this and started following people that were exposing things like, Stephen Jones and the architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth and that type of thing. They go to their families, and their sisters and brothers are like, you're a nut, tinfoil hat. And you've got your people that are well positioned in the media, like Bill O'Reilly and all those people on CNN, Glenn Beck, who was on CNN for a while. And if you question the 9/11 truth, you were referred to as a pinhead or a tinfoil hat, or that they actually came up with the name truther. Mm-hmm. In a demeaning way to you. And there's a lot of people like my protagonist that don't want to be labeled as a truther or a nut job. So they don't want to look. But they may know something's going on. Well, what I'm getting from people is I read your book. I gave your book to my sister, my mother, blah, blah, blah. And after they read the book, they're wide awake now. And they can't thank me enough. And that was my target audience. That's why I wrote the book straight from my heart. Listen, this was so personal to me because I could have been one of those passengers. Mm-hmm. I mean, so easily, because I was commuting coast to coast. So, I mean, I so easily could have been there. I missed it by, I feel like the hair on my chinny chin chin, It was real close to home, and it changed my world. It changed how I went to work. It changed how I was treated when I tried to go to work. My work was inside an airplane. I had all these Walmart workers with blue gloves going through all my stuff, squeezing out my toothpaste every time I went to work. It was just horrible. And so, I think that when I put this together, I wanted the people to really connect with Vera Hansen, the main character. She's a senior flight attendant, and she's afraid to look, and most of us were, and I was. And so I bring them through step by step, introduce them to the real dump of 9/11 truth. Starts in about maybe 170, and from a guy named Max Hager, and he's the truther's truther. He lets them know about everything that went on that day that we weren't told. I wasn't told any of this in the media. Mm-hmm. I never knew there was possibly a woman or two involved, and so you can actually hear a woman, and I've got a professional voice analyzers that are analyzing some tapes for me, but there was a flight attendant on Flight 93 named Cece Lyles. And Cece Lyles, if you just Google search, you can find a Wikipedia post on Cece Lyles Flight 93. It should get you to the Wikipedia on her. And down on the lower right-hand side, you'll see a few players, like these little MP3 type players. And you click on, one of them is a recording she left at home. Cece Lyles was a police officer for 6 years. If somebody was threatening her, she'd fight back. Her husband was a police officer who worked nights, so she left a message at 9:47 a.m., about 15 minutes before impact in Shanksville, where you will hear a quiet, just like my voice right now, in a room by myself. It's all some quiet here, where she says,
"Hi, baby. Baby, you have to listen to me carefully. I'm on a plane that's been hijacked. I'm on the plane. I'm calling from the plane. Want to tell you I love you. Please tell my children that I love them very much. And I'm so sorry, babe. I don't know what to say. There's 3 guys. They've hijacked the plane. I'm trying to be calm. We're turned around, and I've heard that there's planes that's been flown into the World Trade Center. I hope to be able to see your face again, baby. I love you. Bye."
End of message. Her voice starts to break at the end as you start to cry. You know how you can't keep talking because you're going to start crying. She hands the phone to someone. You can clearly hear this on the Wikipedia tape, and I highly suggest you download it because as I continue doing this, they will remove this. And so you can hear her the phone she's talking on, whether it's her cell phone or a receiver. It almost sounds like an old receiver. Her hand is over the speaker part. You know, it's like if I go like that on my microphone, you probably hear that. And then you hear a woman's voice, and it appears to say, "You did great.
I love you. Bye."
You did great.
Wow.
Now, in a situation like this, she's in control of a hijack situation as a crew member. She's making a phone call. There's no passenger that's going to be there telling her she did great.
Right.
And that's a woman involved in this that you don't know about. And it's right there on Wikipedia for you to hear. The Illuminati love to do this. They love to put it in your face. And what happened for me when the veil lifted, I saw it all in my face.
Right.
And okay, just to let you know this, about a week ago, I was contacted on Skype by someone who claimed to know someone that was a Skype contact that was somebody else. And it didn't quite feel right to me. I have an incredible level of discernment too. And so I asked this person that they referenced, I said, who is this person that's asking to meet up with me or contact me or, well, these personal questions to me. It's an Illuminati hitman.
Wow.
They don't want this information out.
How did you reckon that?
He told the person that he referenced owns a forum, and they apparently were having a discussion about my book on a forum online, and this Illuminati hitman this Illuminati hitman apparently was monitoring this gentleman's forum. And so when he came to me, he was basically on Skype saying, the introduction, like, I want to add you to my contacts. Are you the 9/11 Rebekah Roth? And I thought, well, that's really a weird thing to say. And then mentioned this other person's name who I knew because it was a contact of mine on Skype. And this guy does run a forum online and does videos and stuff. And so I thought, what's the connection? Well, he started to kind of ask me some, serious personal type questions like where I was type of things. And I have to talk with you, blah, blah, blah. So I asked my other friend, who is this person? Because I'm not going to continue talking to someone I don't know who it is. And he's the one who told me he's an Illuminati hitman. Sent me a picture of the guy. And so I know now that I've done enough, I've got enough YouTubes out there and all of that. People always I have so many people praying over me for my safety, and I feel it. And I feel very blessed by that. And just so you know, I wrote this book 2 years ago, and it sat on a shelf. And it sat on a shelf for 2 reasons. 1, the Illuminati hitman. And 2, the truth movement itself. The truth movement itself actually was probably the most detrimental. And I've had people come to me and very nastily say, what took you so long? Why didn't you come out? Why didn't you stop these wars before? And I mean, I've had just really weird behavior from 9/11 quote unquote truthers. They're going to vet me. And if they can vet me, I'll be okay in their movement. I don't need their movement. I am the truth and I'll stand in it because I have one person that I stand with in the truth. And one of the things that Jesus said when he was here was very important. I think a lot of people need to understand this. The Illuminati is going to bring you down in fear and doubt. And you'll see a lot of this online, the FEMA camps, and they're going to come after us, the Jade Helm, all this fear. Get out of that vibration. Our system operates on frequencies. And if you're down there in fear and doubt, you're so easily controlled. And there is a frequency, and Jesus was all about that. It's a 4-letter word called love. The second word that he often mentioned was joy, because he brought joy to people who were around him. That's the feeling they had. The vibration of joy and love overpowers every evil. And the way we want to fight this evil force, this Luciferian Illuminati dark side that's in control, is to unite in joy and love. It's hard to do because you feel overwhelmed, but you're not. We are the majority. We need to stand together and fight this.
Amen, sister.
Coming from our perspective, we, as a show that looks at Bible prophecy, it's our opinion that a lot of these sorts of events were prophesied, not specifically the events itself, but the sort of, the Luciferian overlords, or just this dark, sinister force, is a spiritual battle, not so much of a physical one. Ephesians 6:12 talks about we wrestle not against flesh and blood.
Exactly.
There's several passages that talk about, a one world type government, one world religious system that will basically overtake the world in the end times, and that stuff does seem to provoke fear. We've been accused of fear mongering and stuff like that. But ultimately, it seems like, and there's a lot of passages that talk about, we are not given a spirit of fear, but a spirit of truth, love, and a sound mind. So that's what we operate in, or we try to operate in. Sometimes even that takes a beating. You guys don't take stuff seriously enough. We've gotten that a little bit recently. But just to wrap it up, you said you were working on a sequel. What direction are you taking the story in terms of, is there more that this the main character uncovers, or what? Is there more on 9/11, or where are you taking it?
What I have right now, and I'm not the only one that has this information, because I'm nobody's dummy. I've been around. With age comes wisdom, so I know how these people work. That this information is not just in my hands, but we have uncovered through the Freedom of Information Act terabyte of data that I have, proof that will rock the entire world. And it is all around 9/11. And there's no way they can get out of this. It's in their own documentation. And it's such proof that they can't deny it. It's let me just put it this way. It's kind of computerized proof.
Digital proof.
Boom.
And how computers, when you do something, they put a stamp on it?
Right.
It tells you when they created it.
So the whole mark of the beast system is working against them. The whole technocracy.
Exactly. Well, they got busted, and so there's several things that are going to come out, and I'm going to work it into a sequel. I'm hoping to have it out by the end of summer, hopefully before September 1st, and on the market and available, because this is information that really, I couldn't even believe it when I saw it, because we were looking for a needle in a haystack, and it was right there on the top of the stack.
Right.
It was so obvious. It was like, and okay, so let me just touch on something. When I exchanged some information with a researcher that had this terabyte of information, he didn't have a lot of money, and I said, listen, I want all of that information, because what's going to cost you a hard drive, an external hard drive that'll hold a terabyte of stuff. I said, I'll send one right to you. So I sent him from Amazon. I just ordered it, sent it to his home. I said, when you get it uploaded, just let me know what the postage is, and I'll send it to you. This happened. I actually got my external hard drive on Christmas Eve. And he, 2 days before that, he called me on Skype, and here's your screenshot of your postage. And it was $9.11. And when I saw that, I knew that a force so much bigger than me was behind all of this. It's like when I discovered a story that you'll find in there that's about 9B's wife in an FBI document that is in the novel. That blew me away, and I was in final edit of the book, and I'm like, I have to write this in. I had to rebuild the chapter to put that in. It's such an important thing, just like what you just will hear on the tape with Cece Lyles. The woman says, you did great, and I'm thinking, nobody's telling me as a flight attendant I did great making a phone call. But here's another interesting thing. According to the NTSB and the FAA, that aircraft that she was sitting on was in a descent between 6,000 and 10,000 feet per minute. Let me tell you what would be going on. The aircraft would itself be making a shuddering, ruddering, shaking sound that would sound like it's falling apart, because it almost is.
Right.
And you would hear passengers screaming and a lot of commotion. You hear nothing, just like my voice right now. You hear nothing in the background. You don't hear jets. You don't hear nothing that you would be hearing. It's just like listening to the official story where these three guys are running up with full coffee pots of hot water and hot coffee in this narrow little aisle with the aircraft coming down at a 40-degree angle and then upside down. I'm sorry, but you're not going to do that. Even a well-trained flight attendant is not going to be able to stand in the aisle with the aircraft coming down in a rapid descent in a 40-degree angle. And you certainly can't do it upside down. So, I mean, when you put all the details together, it's such a nonsensical story. No wonder they made a Hollywood movie out of it. No wonder nobody went to it. Went right to disc, I think, or didn't do very well in the theaters. But yeah. One of the things that I did include, just so you guys know, and I have a video on my YouTube channel, which is Rebekah Roth, and you can just find it to Rebekah Roth on YouTube. There's a video there. It's called, Could This Be the Next False Flag? And I talk about this in the book, and they actually find this document, and I actually saw it online. It was from an Israeli newspaper a couple years ago online. I believe it was Ynet News, but I'm not positive. But I luckily read it out loud to my husband, and it was a plan that the Israeli intelligence, Mossad, had uncovered by Al-Qaeda. And we know who Al-Qaeda is now. And that they were going to launch a 5 or 6 major city attack on the United States using biological, chemical, and nuclear warheads on the anniversary of Osama bin Laden's death, May 2nd, for 9 days until May 11th.
Wow.
And that 9/11 just jumped out the page at me. I was like, what? Well, we know that Al-Qaeda was created by CIA and the Mossad. Mm-hmm. And we've got Hillary Clinton sitting there in Congress telling us that we created, with Brzezinski, with Tim Osman as aka Osama bin Laden. So you can go onto my YouTube channel. You guys can have it. You can upload it. You can share it. You can do anything you want with it. I think it's called, Could This Be the Next False Flag? And that actually was found online pretty much. I had to create for the novel the cities, because I'm just guessing which ones they will use. They didn't mention which cities, but it will affect over a 9-day period if they pull this off and blame Iran to stop the peace movement there. Or Syria and Iran, or North Korea or Russia, or whoever they want to blame, just like they did on 9/11. They blamed Middle Eastern descent. So that kind of covered everybody that we just went over and bombed over the last decade. So that's it's important that people know that, because I think you should be prepared, first, spiritually, second, emotionally, and third, physically, with your food and your water. And I really highly recommend that people do that.
Amen, sister. All right. Well, thank you so much, Rebekah Roth, for coming on the show. Before we completely wrap up here, why don't you let us know where we can find your stuff, all your things?
Well, here's what you can do. If you like autographed books, and just so you know, so your listeners know, after, let's see, today's the 13th, I'm going to guess by the 20th or somewhere between the 15th and the maybe 17th and 20th, I'll have a hard cover edition It'll be the second edition. The Kindle is currently in second edition. Those will be available on Amazon. Also, they're available autographed on my webpage. It's just methodicalillusion.com. And it'll take you to a secure online store run by Square. And if you don't have a Square account, you're going to check out as a guest. And you can buy that for $20 US, $30 US money internationally. And I'll autograph it, sign it any way you want. There's a message box if you want a special name or somebody else's. There's also breakdowns for discounts. If you want to buy more than 12, you can just contact the publisher and get an even bigger discount. Amazon, all bookstores will order it for you. It takes about a week. If you go to Barnes & Noble, you'll prepay for it. It's $16.95 for the softback. I think it's $26 or something will be the hardback next week when it comes out. The Kindle is $9.11 in the United States. It's an instant read, and I recommend that. But you can also start reading the first 3 chapters on my website, www.methodicalillusion.com. So there you go. I think that takes care of it.
There you go, everybody. Make sure to check that out. Rebekah Roth, one more time, thanks for coming on the show, yo.
Yeah, you're so welcome. Thanks for having me. And just text me an address or email me an address. I'll mail you guys a book.
Sounds good.
Awesome.
So there you have it, folks. Very interesting conversation with Rebekah Roth. We hope you enjoyed it. We hope, you got to, get another perspective on things. This was a thing I hadn't heard before. I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with her, but anyhow, check that out.
Yeah.
Check out the book.
And I hope that we did cover a lot of the same stuff that she's been talking about, and, she's been doing the rounds with interviews. But I think we did touch on certain things that, for example, Coast to Coast or, John B. Wells and stuff, or even Hagman and Hagman didn't touch on, which,
Yeah. And it was cool to learn that she was a Christian, too. We didn't even know that she was Christian when she came on.
Right.
So there you go.
There's a little new agey thing in there, but it's okay. At least
it's all good. It's all about Jesus, baby. All right. So if you've made it this far in, congratulations. It's now
we
time.
always congratulate people that make it.
I know. Well, this is a long one.
It's true.
All right. So there you go. If you want to listen to more Canary Cry Radio, you can go to canarycryradio.com or find us on iTunes. I'm sure you know how to do that because you're listening to this now. But on canarycryradio.com, you can also do fun things like go to our forum, talk to other people, look at, art and stuff. Also, if you want to support Canary Cry Radio financially, we have a support button there, and you can go there and you can make a monthly subscription type gift thingy, and that's fun. You don't have to think about it. It's automatically boom every month. Easy, fun, fun. It's fun. Or if commitment's not your thing, you can go ahead and make a one-time gift in any amount there. And we really appreciate everybody who's been helping us out. You're really keeping the lights on over here. So we are sincerely thankful for that. Right, Gons?
Absolutely. And we should do a better job of thanking them individually.
We do. We try to do that. You mean like on the air?
Not necessarily. But.
Here, let me pull it up. Let me see if I can look at a couple. All right. I don't know how many, I don't know if I can say names. Should we say names? Let's call this guy, hypothetically, we'll call him Glenn. Thank you, Glenn, for your donation. What else do we have here? Here's one. Let's hypothetically call this man Brian. Thank you, Brian, for your generous gift. They're gifts, not donations.
Gifts.
Anyways, there's a couple guys. Thank you, guys.
There's Hypothetical Nicholas.
Hypothetical Nicholas.
Hypothetical William.
Yep. Let's see.
Hypothetical Tyler.
Yes, Hypothetical Tyler. Thank you.
Hypothetical Sarah.
Okay, that's enough. We gotta skip something next time.
Okay.
All right, everybody. We love you.
Oh, on the record?
Yeah.
I don't think the Earth is flat. Do you? Do you think the Earth is flat?
Oh yeah, we should go on the record because that was really funny.
I don't think it's
This is the most outrage of any episode. It's like we do episode on episode, and the outrage recently has just been getting bigger and bigger. No, I personally am not convinced that the Earth is flat, everybody. So don't worry.
Yeah, I don't think the Earth
I'm
is
not
flat
in
either.
that school of thought. And we got a lot of comments and things about how we're imbeciles for even entertaining that interview.
We're ridiculous. The Earth is not flat, guys.
Right.
That's what we get. We get no. It's concave. Is what it is.
No, it's funny because we do an episode on Obama teleporting to Mars and Bigfoot and reptilian species and like the craziest things. And then the flat Earth, just like so much vitriol. So yeah, no. We get it, everybody. The Earth is more than likely not flat.
More than likely.
And if you don't know what we're talking about, you can go ahead and listen to our last episode about the flat Earth.
One last thing about that, and we'll never speak of it again.
It's a good time.
It's a really just in my mind, my sociological background of studying sociology and people's sort of reaction to things. It's the most fascinating thing because there's different concentric groups with different views within like the world of flat Earth, and so they're like we got one perspective from one guy, and so all of like he's a shill, he puts false information in with real information of flat Earth. The Earth is actually concave. You didn't present the whole theory properly. People are very passionate about this topic. It was very interesting to see all your responses, even all the negative ones. I loved it.
Yeah.
I personally thought it was a testament to this idea that the whole flat Earth thing could be, the grandest conspiracy. Really is kind of like the last and biggest conspiracy, because if that's true, then it's like, oh, the heck do we know about anything,
Who can we trust? All right.
Anyway,
okay, so there you go, everybody. You take it easy, keep it fresh, keep it crispy.
Drink some coffee.
Eat
some fruit.
Yeah, and then come back and see us again.
Not GMO fruit, though.
On the next episode of Canary Cry Radio. But until you do, think outside the cage.
The flat cage. Dome.
Okay.